Hi everyone. I want to first of all say thank you for your flexibility. I found out that I have some fractures in my rib and it was just too painful to try to put this together last night after teaching. So I have everything for you now, and hopefully all of it will make sense, and we will be able to get some good work done between now and when we meet face to face. So just to kind of go over the module, right here you can see is the PowerPoint and that I'm going to be going through. So this is the pre-session number 2 PowerPoint, but you always have a copy of it right here. This is just directly out of the syllabus, and then here is our agenda. So we're going to do a warm-up. Oh, this is kind of funny how that did. Let me fix it. There we go. Now everything's lined up. Okay, so we're going to do a warm-up on volunteer tourism. Then we're going to review session 1, expectations, talk about special education in America, and I've got a video here for you to watch, and then an article from understood.org. We'll talk a little bit about change making, the blog post number 1 and how you'll do that, and then the critical reflection number 2. The next step, so this is by the 11th before class. That's a really important thing, is you have to turn things in before class starts. You're going to finish the reading on understood.org, and it's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, What You Need to Know. And then you will do 2 chapters from this lovely book, the textbook that I asked you to get. So it's chapters, I think it's chapters 1 and 2. Or I'm sorry, the introduction and number 2, chapter 2. So, and then I want you just to read chapter 1 of this book. Can we talk about race? So this is just to kind of continue our dialogue about intersectionality. This book is really about the African countries and how they're looking at education, or inclusive education. And then just the activities that you're going to do is you're going to actually put your first blog post up, and then complete the 4 questions from critical reflection number 2. You're going to do your second changemaker email, which I should have out to everybody tomorrow. And then also just a reminder that our next meeting, face-to-face meeting, is on the 11th from 4 to 6. And I've sent an email out to the Global Sender to find out what room that'll be in. And as soon as I hear back, I will let you know. These are the 4 questions from the critical reflection. So the first one is, what's one thing that surprised you from the Willowbrook movie? This is the link to the Willowbrook movie, and it just shows you, it's actually a undercover from the 70s of what we used to do with children with disabilities, and where we used to put them and what their experiences were, and it's actually pretty emotional. So yeah, but I think it's a really good start because it's very reflective of how we used to see disabilities and differences. The next one is based on, it's kind of a jump off of this understood.org article that I'm asking you to read. And in there, they talk about the 13 categories of disabilities that are identified by IDEA. And I just want you to pick one category, and like I said, there's 13 of them, and you're just going to do a quick online search, and you're going to figure out what does IDEA say the characters of that disability are, and then just 3 helpful interventions that teachers can do to support a learner identified as having that type of disability. So for example, you might pick autism, and then you would do a autism search with IDEA in there to make sure you're looking at the legal educational term, and then you would figure out, maybe do a search on how can teachers help students with on the autism spectrum. So, and then just write out those things, and then we'll come together and we'll talk about it, and then we'll also learn some more next week. Then I'm asking you to, for this chapter, I want you to explain the resegregation of our schools and the affirmation of identity, which is the first chapter. And I want you to at least use 2 examples from the text of just, what is she saying is happening, and, what is your example there? And we're going to talk about that a little more face to face. And then for the 2 chapters that you're reading in here, or the introduction in the chapter, I just want you to describe how African countries are implementing inclusion. Okay, I'm going to take my video off now so that you're not going to see my face, but you'll still hear my voice. So let's get into the PowerPoint so that we can get through this. So I'm just going to make everything a little bit bigger. And there we go. Okay, so the big thing here is that I just want us to start thinking about, like, what is the effect that we're going to have on this country as well, and what do we need to know before we get to South Africa. So we're going to start out, and I was watching. Actually, this came up on my YouTube, my Facebook, but I want us to watch this video right here. Let's see. It's just up, actually. So, right now.
That volunteer trip you might be going on this year isn't helping anyone. Voluntourism trips are largely designed to benefit the visitor rather than the host communities, making a spectacle out of poverty and reinforcing outdated stereotypes about developing countries. I've spent 20 years going in and out of war zones throughout the world, seeing and meeting those on the front lines who are doing incredible things for humanity. And what they ask, what they deserve more than anything else, is that we believe in them, that we invest in them, in their capacity, and their competency. Volunteer tourism, sometimes called voluntourism, is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, with millions of people volunteering while on vacation every year. But is this industry all it's cracked up to be? Reports from Haiti and Cambodia of orphanages offering volunteer experiences, where foreigners can pay to spend a few weeks reading and visiting with young children, no background checks required, have been accused of keeping conditions deliberately squalid, so that visitors will feel compelled to give more to help the children they just met. Except those improvements never materialize. On many volunteer websites, you'll see photos and videos of foreigners with happy kids hanging off their backs and shoulders, accompanied by testimonials about how much the local children enjoyed and appreciated the visit, making the experience even more emotionally rewarding. But here's what you won't read. Studies by child psychologists in South Africa of orphan children exposed to a revolving door of foreigners might be hyper-affectionate because they are constantly forming bonds with outsiders who, inevitably, abandon them. It is normal for young children to be fearful of strangers. It is not normal for them to cling to you the moment you say hello. In other words, that love they are showing may be a sign of the ongoing psychological harm caused by, guess who? The very same people writing and vlogging about how appreciated they were. Big tourism companies like Carnival now offer social impact cruises that include popping into local communities to teach English or cultivate cocoa plants. Hundreds of charities and nonprofits also do similar do-good, feel-good experiences, where for $3,000 to even $10,000, you can be part of overseas development work in action, meet the locals, and help some kids. Impoverished communities around the world won't be saved by our volunteer labor and good intentions. Quite the opposite. What they want, need, and deserve more than anything else are the tools, resources, and opportunities to learn and to do that work themselves. They need your financial support to do what they know needs doing, not our unskilled volunteer labor. If you really want to make a difference, think about donating some of what you might have spent on a give-back vacation and put that money into the hands of those who could really use it, the frontline workers within those communities who are doing tremendous things against all odds. Or simply drop the volunteer part and concentrate on the tourism. Visitors can shop in local women's cooperatives, support local tourism, and spend money on things like handmade wood carvings and beaded wallets that can cover a family's school fees for a year. Caribbean nations still reeling from recent hurricanes can especially benefit from those tourist dollars right now. It's important for us to see the world and to live in it and to experience it, but it's also important for us to make sure that our actions don't harm others.
All right, so one of the big things that we are doing with this trip is it's not volunteer tourism. Instead, what we're doing is we're going in there and we're working with the educators in South Africa to not only help their education system, but also to help ours. I think this whole experience, you're going to learn a lot about some amazing things that are happening with very little resources. And so I really want you to kind of go into it thinking about it in that way. And because the schools are out, we probably won't see too many children, but there may be a few stops where the kids will be there. So we're excited about that. Anyway, but that's just to kind of get us started. All right. So I went over the agenda already. So first thing is, and we're going to talk about this more when we're face to face, but I had you guys read the textbooks because I wanted you to really kind of get a sense about, the experience within South Africa, the writing within South Africa, and also to see that, hey, it's not actually that different than the writing here in the United States. The movie was really intended to give you a little glimpse into the lives. I know that I really recommended the movie that was talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, Long Night's Journey into Day. And if you do ever have an opportunity to watch that before we go, I really do recommend you see that. The Changemaker email. Almost everybody now has emailed. I've been keeping track, and I'll actually just show you how I'm keeping track of everything. Just pull this up. But you can see here is the special email that I created, and you can see all the different groups and all the emails that have come through. And so I'm really impressed with the quality and the depth that I've seen even just on my simple questions of, what do you hope to get out of this? So thank you for that. The social location essays I haven't had a chance to go through and read yet, but what that was meant to do is really kind of anchor you in, hey, this is what I know about who I am and what I'm bringing to the table. And what you're hopefully going to see as we go through this experience is how who you are is going to shift. But knowing where you're starting from is really important as you watch this shift happen. So, all right. So, why South Africa? I get asked that question all the time, and I always say that it's because there's actually a lot of similarities between the two. So here's a sign from the U.S. Restrooms, white and colored seated in the rear. What is this? No dogs, Negroes, or Mexicans. And then here's the South African sign, and it says, white persons only. This beach and the amenities thereof have been reserved for white persons only. And then this is saying the exact same thing, net blancas in Afrikaans. Here's our educational history. So, after slavery, it was actually all schools were open to everybody. And then in 1890, we came up with the Jim Crow law, which is also known as separate but equal. So it was decided that we didn't want all of the ex-slaves working or going to school with our kids. So instead we said, well, everybody will go to their own school, but they'll be equivalent. So they'll have similar books and education, but we just don't need to be together. Well, and then we went in the 1900s where we would send everybody off to residential hospitals if they had a disability, or they were they would drop out of school because they weren't educable, is with the term that it was. Well, in the 1900s in South Africa, they were doing the same thing. They were saying, you know what, you don't need to be. Not everybody needs an education. So if you're different in some way, then chances are that you're going to be excluded. So 1954 is when Brown versus the Board of Education happened. And we said, okay, you know what? That's illegal. And we actually need to desegregate the schools. It took 10 years before us to actually make that a law. So although it was a lawsuit, it was not actually in law until 1964. In 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act happened. And then once again, 10 years later, PL 94142, which is the special education law, came into effect. And then we have reauthorized that law in 1997, actually 1990 and 1997, and then the last one was done in 2004. And that's the big one we talk about, and we call it IDEA, just so you know. We usually drop the I in improvement, but sometimes you'll hear IDEIA. In South Africa, so once again, they started out with excluding the diverse learners, and then in 1948, the Afrikaans people actually had been systematically getting ready for apartheid since the turn of the century. They knew that they had to make the language important and the language of money and politics, and so they slowly started making all these laws that kept people of color from being able to buy land, have bank accounts, and all of those things. So by 1948, they were able to pass into law apartheid. And that made it actually illegal for blacks, coloreds, and whites and Indians to actually live in the same community or go to the same school. Interestingly enough, they were still asked to learn in Afrikaans, even though there were, many languages in South Africa at that time. But all their major tests were done in Afrikaans. We know that apartheid happened for many years, and we're going to learn more about that. We're going to actually go to the Apartheid Museum and learn there too. But in 1991 is when it ended. There's a little bit of discrepancy, so you may see a different date. Sometimes you see 92, sometimes you see 90. But that's really when the talk started happening, and they said, okay, we're going to get rid of this system. In 1996 is when the Constitution was signed, and in the Constitution they said all South Africans will get an education. And they also said all languages will be respected. So there's 11 official languages in South Africa. And then in 2001, so 5 years later, they actually wrote a position paper called White Paper Number 6, which basically said the entire country is going to be inclusive. So all students are going to be able to go to school together. And they decided that they were going to shut down as many of the special schools, which are segregated, as they can. And so this is kind of, you can see that we went from excluded to some laws changing and saying, okay, now we're going to help people. Here in the U.S., we do things very slowly. So our inclusive practices have happened due to lawsuits and also within our laws of IDEA. Whereas in South Africa, they went very progressive and they said, okay, that's it. We're going to have all full inclusion. So, all right. So now's the time where I want you to pause this and I want you to go to the link of the Willowbrook movie. And I have it in a Google Drive. So if you have any issues with opening it or anything else, please let me know. But I'm just going to start the movie just a little bit so that you can see what I am talking about when I talk about this movie. So let me pull up and it should play just fine. We'll see. Here we go. And you can see it's an older movie, so it's not a great copy. That's 27 minutes. If you can at least watch the first 15, I think you're good, but you might even want to watch all 27. But you'll get the idea. So, oh, and this is also Geraldo Rivera. So he's going through and he's just talking about kind of the background of it. We're not going to watch it right now, but as you can see, you can make it bigger on your screen too. The next thing I want you to do is read this article. So understood.org is a pretty good website when it comes to learning about special needs. And they have a nice article that just gives you kind of the gist of special ed law. So this is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's the IDEA, what you need to know. And it just gives you at a glance the purpose. And then here's those 13 disabilities. So you're going to pick one of these disabilities. And then I want you to go through and research it. And you can also click on this if you want to also get more information. And it goes through and it'll tell you a little bit about each one. And then I want you to say like, okay, well, for somebody with traumatic brain injury, and I would just kind of copy this, go through, put it in here, teacher, information for teachers, there we go, or tips for teachers, and then, go in there in the classroom, what teachers should know, and remember, I said I wanted 3 of them, so that's what you're going to come through. So here's the common things, this is what's going on with them, and then, maybe this one's not great for interventions, but I did see there's another website, Classroom Interventions for Students with Traumatic Brain Injury. So this is probably a great article, setting the stage, assessment, structuring the environment. So these are all great ideas. So I want you to come in ready to talk about this with your colleagues. Next, just to give you an idea, so once again, as I mentioned, this IDEA is this is the foundation of special education in the U.S. So there's 6 parts to it that are really well known. And one thing I will say about special ed is we have a lot of acronyms, which you'll get used to some because I'll be talking about them. But if I ever say an acronym and you can't remember what it is, please ask me. So one is zero reject. So you can't actually say that someone doesn't qualify for special education unless you have gone through and a team has decided that they haven't. And it's your job as educators, general ed teachers, as principals, as anyone who works in a school to actually look around to see if they can find students who might need this support. Then another requirement is non-discriminatory identification and evaluation. They actually did some research on this, and they found out that African American and Latino boys are often identified, especially the African Americans, as having an emotional disturbance or an intellectual disability at higher rates than Asian or white students. And so one of the things that they put into law is that we need to make sure that our identification and evaluation of all students isn't discriminatory. So there's a lot of ways that we do that we'll get more into as the class progresses. The other thing is called free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. So once someone qualifies for special education, it needs to be free. It needs to be at their level. It should be in the public school system. Whatever services are paid for by the district. The other thing is least restrictive environment. Now, this is the big one when we talk about inclusion, which is a lot about what this class is about. We're talking about least restrictive environment. So all children should be in school with their peers, their age-level peers, for as much of their day as is reasonable. And so that's where inclusion really came in, as we said, okay, how can we make sure that the students are with their peers? And so we need to do extra supports in the classroom and training with the teacher so that they're ready to work with all students. And then that there's due process safeguards, so that parents have rights, the students have rights, the school district has rights, and that we go through these different systems and the meetings and the requirements and all of these things to make sure that everyone's needs are being met. And then finally, that parent and student participation is involved. Their students and parents are involved in the planning for the education program, the IEP, and that there's shared decision making, and that's from the multidisciplinary team. And we're going to talk more about that next week as well. But one of the ways that we do that is actually through the multi-tiered system of support. So that's the MTSS, if you've ever heard about it. And then on the academic side, this is called response to intervention. On the behavior side, it's called positive behavior interventions and supports. So for academics, if we give good teaching to all students, then they should actually be okay. So we just need to make sure that we're integrating different strategies and interventions that support all of our learners. And we can basically meet 80% of the students in schools using these basic good teaching strategies. For 15% of the students, we need what are called Tier 2. So that's Tier 1. We need Tier 2 interventions. And so this is maybe small group. This is maybe, some extra support, pre-learning, or maybe an additional graphic organizer or that type of thing. And that goes back, both on the behavior and the academic side. And really only 5% of students should actually have the really intense one-on-one interventions, whether they're academic, where they're pulled out and they're given speech and language, or they're behavioral and, they're given counseling services. So we really do believe that most students' needs can be met inside the classroom. We just need to know how to do that. And that's part of what this class is about too, is training you on how to make sure that your classroom is supporting all your learners. All right, the other thing that I wanted to talk about today is the change makers. And the three pieces that we're really looking at is, the first one is framing. So right now I'm trying to give you guys the background of, the background information that you need to know about yourself. So this is the intersectionality part, and also the communities that we're going to be serving. So this is also the South Africans sharing their information about who they are and what their school systems are like. The second part is the convening. So the convening is when you come together with these other educators that we're working with. So we're doing that right now online through our emails, and then we'll be doing it in person once you get to South Africa. And then the igniting is the making change happen. And so that'll be our Changemaker event once we get to South Africa, that you'll be planning as the time goes by, or the weeks go by, and we get closer to getting to South Africa. So, all right. So some people asked, okay, you said to create a blog, but you never told us what we needed to put in there. And we're just going to do blog posts. And I think 150, and I'll even say to 200 words is fine. But not really much more than that, because people get tired of reading. And what I want you to do is kind of summarize what we've done for each one of the modules. And you're going to be doing like a summary of each day as well when we're in South Africa. But basically, it's just on the readings, the email exchanges. For this one, it'll be on the movie and the book, and the social location essay. And you're just kind of summarizing, these are the big pieces that I took with me from the first module in April. And, and this, you can use from the email exchange, this is the little paragraph or a few sentences that you wrote about, the three things that you're hoping to get out of this. So really it is just kind of a summary of everything that you can share with other people, so they can also understand where you are on this journey towards learning about South African education, learning about inclusive practices, and also, as she mentioned in the volunteer tourism clip, that we are actually learning from each other, because there's a lot of growth that we can do. So, all right. So the critical reflection for this week, I went over this before, but you're going to name one thing that surprised you from the Willowbrook movie. And if you name something from the very beginning, I'll know that you didn't maybe watch 15 minutes. So please try to do your best to watch at least 15 minutes. Then you're going to choose one of the 13 categories of disabilities, research online, explain the characteristics of the disability, and 3 helpful interventions that teachers can do to support the learner. And then look at the Dr. Tatum book and explain, oops, that's missing the other side to that. Explain the resegregation of our schools and the affirmation of identity. What does she mean by that? And give 2 examples from the text for that. And then the South African inclusive education in African context. And you read the 2 chapters, and I want you to explain to me how are African countries implementing inclusion. So that takes us to what's next is the reading. So once again, there's the understood.org with the link. You've got the inclusive education with these 2. So it's page 1 to 18 and then 37 to 48. And then can we talk about race? Chapter 1, activity blog, blog number 1 post, critical reflection number 2 post, changemaker number 2. And so if you have any questions or need any sort of support, please let me know. And this is all, of course, due before class on the 11th of May. All right. Have a great day. Thank you.